Waiver Wire Editions Week 8. And I'm re-recording this one. I recorded this one before Monday Night Football, and I had to run it back before we released it because of all the injuries. So this is like, I try to get these videos out early, try to get the podcast out early, but you're going to get in this one late because we had catastrophic injuries, as you know. Chris Godwin, one of the best possible picks you could make at ADP, done. Sounds like the season's over. This might be the last time you ever see Chris Godwin in a Bucs uniform. Mike Evans, also hamstring, injured. So we talk about the next man in. We talk about grinding on the waiver wire. We're going to continue doing that. But this changes my entire top 10 overall. End of this video, I reveal my top 10 overall waiver wire rankings. And we got a new number one. That's Jalen McMillan, next man in. We're going to talk about him a little bit later on the show. Anybody who hasn't listened to this podcast or watched this video knows that we specifically focus on players that are available to you in 70% of leagues or more. So this is not a shallow league waiver wire show. So there's a lot of guys that are like 50% rostered, and other people are going to talk about them as considerations to add. You're not going to hear about that on this show. There's plenty of waiver wire material like that on other channels. It doesn't help me, and I don't think it would help you if you're listening to this podcast, you're watching this video. I'm looking for players that are available to me in my leagues, deeper formats. I want to find players that can give us an edge, even in very competitive formats. And a lot of you appreciate that. So we're going to look to try to grind through. This is a tough one. This is a weird one. Usually mid-season, we continue to get next man in mentality in fantasy football week in, week out. But mid-season, a lot of times in the past, your main priorities are going to be that running back. And certainly there's running backs to add this week, but this week's focus is the wide receiver position. It's the wide receiver position. There's multiple wide receivers that now have an increased opportunity, and we're going to prioritize them this week. This is an odd thing. We had Brandon Aiyuk lost to an injury this week. We had Deebo Samuel dealing with pneumonia, and then obviously the Tampa Bay injuries as well. So we're really, really shifting our priorities. So we had to get you the most relevant information here at Player Profiler. We're trying to help you win leagues, not trying to give you outdated information. Let's talk about a few players that are available to you in shallow leagues. Now, these players are going to be available to you. These are players rostered in like 30 to 40% of leagues, meaning that they're going to be available to you for some of these players like 60% available. So these guys don't make my top 10, but they're still worth mentioning. Let's start out with Tyler Allgeier. He's available to you in 61% of leagues, and it's a kind of an easy one here. If Bijan Robinson were to go down, the quality of this offense and the way they're utilizing the running back position, Tyler Allgeier would be a low-end RB1, high-end RB2 every single week. He is a great depth piece for you. Bijan is balling, had 25 points this week, but Allgeier would be the next man in if there were an injury. Hunter Henry just missed the top 10. Would have made the top 10. He's available to you in 69% of leagues. Drake Maye loves him. He's scored 13 and 17 points in back-to-back weeks. I think he can provide low-end tight end one numbers for the rest of the season with Drake Maye. Prioritize him if you need a tight end. He's available in your format. Keon Coleman. This is one where I'm bumping heads with some smart people. Some people are saying kind of ignore the 125 receiving yards because he didn't play on the field with Amari Cooper at all. So this means it's sort of like it's production we want to ignore. And certainly we don't want to overpay for the production with Khalil Shakir and certainly Amari Cooper there. This is a player that we can't bank on Keon Coleman doing this week in, week out, but this is a huge step in the right direction. 21 years old, and to get 125 receiving yards against that Titans defense that had not really conceded a whole lot of wide receiver production this year is telling. And what we want to do is we want to stash Coleman, and we want to see what happens for the rest of the year. Can Coleman give us usage where we're able to trust him like week 10 and on in our flex spot? Let's see where this goes. Josh Allen had the most pass attempts he's had in any game this season in Amari Cooper's first game there, and Cooper only played 17 snaps. So don't overpay for Coleman, but if your league is ignoring him, add him. Ty Chandler. This is a guy we talk about every week, and we thought we'd get a start out of Ty Chandler. Aaron Jones played, and he played very well. He's playing like great this year. But Aaron Jones did take a hip injury heading into the bye week in week 5. And obviously Aaron Jones is completely healthy, but We want to have backups in Minnesota because Ty Chandler, if Jones were to miss time, would be an instant RB2 for us. We're going to take a quick break, and we come back. We're going to talk about our wide receivers, running backs, tight ends, and we're going to talk about our overall top 10 waiver wire additions. We'll see you soon.
Hey, I know it's a popular statistic to cite, these underdog pick'ems, the vast majority of people go more than on any given player. Yeah, close to 80% of people, but that's because it's easier to find the shootouts than it is to find the dud games every Sunday afternoon. Like we knew week 5, Ravens-Bengals was going to be a shootout. And there goes Lamar Jackson for 4 touchdowns. There goes Joe Burrow for 5 touchdowns. Derrick Henry gets there. Zay Flowers is over 100 yards. Jamar Chase and T. Higgins both got there, as well as Chase Brown. Both Chases got there. You go more than. You 100x your payout on Underdog with their Pick 6 contest. But then you look at Dolphins Patriots, that's going down the toilet, right? Too bad Ramondre Stevenson had 18 fantasy points. But you improve your chances at positive returns when you correlate with these Underdog pick'ems. Use promo code Underworld. This is the biggest bonus Underdog has ever given out, up to $125. Promo code is Underworld. Put in $250, you get $125. Now go start picking.
Waiver wire additions for week 8. I'm Theo Gremminger, bringing you the waiver wire news you need every single week. And we're grinding through it this week. We're getting through these injuries. We're still looking to get wins. If you have Mike Evans, he's going to be back. If you have Deebo Samuel, he'll be back. If you have Brandon Aiyuk, you have Chris Godwin. It's a whole nother story. You're looking for potential long season replacements. Starting out the QB spot, my favorite player this week, and it should be your favorite player this week, Drake Maye. Back-to-back QB1 finishes. The rookie is balling. He's also in tremendous game flow situations. New England is going to be trailing a ton, which makes him a high-ceiling streamer. Maye has a lot of things we love in fantasy. Big, he's got a big arm, he's athletic, and he's willing to run. This is a player that will get us some rushing production, and he's also got a little bit of gunslinger in him. Last week, he had no interceptions. The week before, he had 2. So there was a real positive there in terms of the turnovers. Drake Maye, we wish we had a better offensive line. We wish he had better weapons, but he's still making something out of nothing. And I think he's going to have way more wide QB1 finishes over the course of the season. This is a player that I'm into, and I think long-term we're going to like him in fantasy as well. Russell Wilson. We were disappointed with the Justin Fields benching. Justin Fields was the guy on this show that we recommended like in week 1. He gave us a bunch of QB1 weeks, and then they goes 4-2, and they bench him in favor for Russell Wilson. And we're kind of like all upset about this. And then Russell Wilson comes out, and to his credit, played fantastic against the Jets. 293 combined yards, 3 touchdowns. Pittsburgh scores a season-high 37 points against a very strong Jets defense. Wilson showed a connection with George Pickens. Pickens is an alpha. Russell Wilson is absolutely a starter in Superflex, and he's a player that you can consider as a streamer in single QB. The Steelers have had a QB1 finisher in 4 of the last 5 weeks. They are producing at the quarterback spot. Superflex managers, keep an eye on the Jameis Winston, Dorian Thompson-Robinson situation. Jameis Winston, we obviously would prefer, but DTR has a little bit of rushing ability, so we don't want to close the door on either one in a Superflex format. If it was Jameis Winston, I would be a little more enthusiastic about that one. A locked-in waiver wire addition, if he's available in your league, especially for Superflex managers, why would he be? But Bo Nix is playing great. He's had, not great, but he's playing way better. Bo Nix is 4th overall in rushing yardage at the quarterback position. He's had 2 QB1 finishes in his last 3 weeks, and he's had 136 combined rushing yards over his past 2 games played. We're starting to see Bo Nix sort of like take off and run with it confidence-wise. So that could lead to more fantasy points. Superflex managers only. Daniel Jones available in 85% of leagues, trending down. Keep an eye on that Drew Lock coming in the second half. Not sure what's going on there. Gardner Minshew available in 98% of leagues. Superflex managers only. Aiden O'Connell is going to miss several weeks. Again, Superflex managers only. Marcus Mariota available to you in 100% of leagues. Of course, Jaden Daniels dealing with a rib injury. If Jaden Daniels misses time, Mariota could be an interesting one. Mariota had 11 rushing attempts We like that. So if it's a spot starter, this offense playing well, he would give you QB2 production in this offense if Daniels misses a week. Running back spot. Got some names to talk about. My favorite running back addition this week is Ray Davis. He makes my top 10 overall. He's available in 74% of leagues still. How he wasn't scooped up after that huge Monday night is sort of beyond me. But gave us the 152-yard breakout in week 6. Follows it up with 11.7 PPR points this past week. This is a player that I think has earned himself a weekly role. James Cook is still leading the way, but Ray Davis is going to work in. And we all saw what Davis is capable of if James Cook were to miss time. So this has contingent upside on an ascending offense and enough juice that you can use him in the flex if you're in a bind. Sticking at the running back spot, Tyler Goodson. Goodson available in 86% of leagues. He's a player that I think you can stick in the flex this week, stick in the RB2 spot. He's trending up. He passed Trey Sermon by, and there's a lack of clarity on Jonathan Taylor for when he'll return from injury. What we've learned this season, we've learned a lot. But one thing you need to remember in the back of your mind, if a coach or a general manager or a front office person ever says it's a mild high ankle sprain, they're full of it. There's no such thing. And we're seeing that with Jonathan Taylor right now. High ankle sprain equals bad. There's no like mild to it. I'm sure there's some that are worse than others, but this is no good. Kimani Vidal, next man in if J.K. Dobbins were to miss time. Big time contingent upside because they use the running back a lot in that offense. Trey Benson, if James Conner were to miss time, Trey Benson would be the next man in. He's available in 82% of leagues. Amari DiMercado is sort of like the Ty Johnson in this situation, where there'll be some people looking to kind of add him over necessarily the rookie, but Trey Benson is the one who really should be rostered. Blake Corum, available in 84% of leagues. He's the next man in if Kyron Williams were to miss time. Kyron Williams just playing absolutely fantastic. If you got Kyron Williams sort of like when he fell in ADP, you're feeling just terrific about things. But that being said, if he went down, Blake Corum would have a ton of value to you. Sean Tucker, we saw the hot hand approach, and it turned into a lot of Bucky Irving and some Rashod White. There's a chance now with the wide receiver injuries that you see the running back usage ramped up in Tampa Bay. So Sean Tucker, I don't mind. I think he's one, if you added him, you don't need to go cut him. See what happens here. Maybe they utilize Bucky Irving and Rashod White a lot more as receivers, and there's a chance that you see Sean Tucker mixed in a little bit more. Also, if Rashod White misses time like he did in week 6, you could see Sean Tucker get another opportunity. So don't just go cutting him. He was an NFC player of the week, and you used fab on him last week. So let's keep going. Justice Hill. Obviously, you know Justice Hill. We've talked about him a lot this season. He's a handcuff and sometimes handcuff plus in a great offense behind Derrick Henry. He'd be a significant fab addition if Henry were to miss time. Dameon Pierce, available in 93% of leagues. Dameon Pierce is simply a backup, but Bobby Slowick's offense has become way more running back centric, way more Joe Mixon centric. And if Joe Mixon were to miss time, Dameon Pierce would be a player you would add. Sticking at the running back spot, sort of the similar argument to Dameon Pierce is Jaylen Wright. If Devon Achane or Raheem Mostert misses time, with Tua Tagovailoa coming back, we're expecting that offense to trend up and at least not necessarily get back to where they were in 2023, but they've just been horrendous. Last week, Achane had way more touches than Mostert. Mostert also fumbled. Mostert has been injured this year. Achane has looked banged up heading into the bye, looks healthy now. So Jaylen Wright, pure stash. Emmanuel Wilson, available in 92% of leagues. Marshawn Lloyd, available in 95. These are your Green Bay stashes. Josh Jacobs goes down. Wilson would be the next man in if it was this week, but Marshawn Lloyd is the one you want to stash. He's got the juice long-term. Isaac Guerendo. So Isaac Guerendo didn't do anything this week. We had expected maybe that Jordan Mason would miss, didn't. But Guerendo is going to get cut in a bunch of leagues. You could still pick him up as just a contingent upside play. Not really anything to talk about there. Kendre Miller, though, this was an interesting one, and I could have included him in the top 10, but again, the top 10 got all mixed up because of the injuries. Kendre Miller is available in 96% of leagues. He played well in New Orleans' loss. He rushed for 36 yards, and he saw 3 targets. So he's sort of a like-for-like usage-wise if Kamara were to go down. You also have the Saints dealing with a lack of players, a lack of Rashid Shaheed now for the season. So Kendre Miller could be one where he ends up seeing weekly touches, and this could be a trend. I know the whole Dennis Allen doesn't like him thing. It's weird, but Dennis Allen really doesn't seem to like him. But at the end of the day, they still might need to use him. Clyde Edwards-Helaire should be back this week, available in 93% of leagues. CEH could get worked in. Juju's going to miss this week. This might be a nothing, but he's going to cost you nothing. So keep an eye on this one. Kareem Hunt playing great. Dearness Johnson available in 92% of leagues. 12 touches for 70 combined yards. Tank Bigsby dominated, but Johnson should also be rostered. And one more player to stash, Keaton Mitchell. We talked about Derrick Henry and Justice Hill, but if Henry were to go down, there's a chance that Keaton Mitchell would get really ramped up, and it would be a committee backfield. And this could be a chance that Mitchell and Hill would both be like flex considerations week in, week out, and spot start running backs if Henry were to miss time. Mitchell was really effective last year, really explosive player, smaller back, but the Ravens really seem to like him, and it'll be interesting to see if they do rest Derrick Henry down the stretch at all. Pivoting over to the wide receiver position, and this is like a week you want to prioritize wide receiver. Some weeks we've talked about prioritizing running back. This is a wide receiver week for you. Obviously, if you need a running back, add one. We talked about a number of them, but wide receiver position. Let's talk about our number one ad and the number one ad and the top 10, and that's Jalen McMillan. Jalen McMillan, like a little bit of history lesson here. Before Monday Night Football's game, I wrote this about Jalen McMillan. I'm pulling it up right now. Jalen McMillan has caught the coaching staff's attention, and they want more production from the Z receiver. If Evans or Godwin were to miss time, McMillan would become a priority ad. So obviously I have to update the article, and I'm re-recording the podcast / YouTube video because Jalen McMillan is now next man in. And this is exciting if you've been stashing Jalen McMillan. I have a ton of dynasty exposure to Jalen McMillan. This was a player that we were high on this past offseason in terms of like rookie drafts. McMillan was a guy who led Washington in receptions in the 2022 season in the same wide receiver room as Rome Odunze and Jalen Polk. Now, 2023, when Washington makes their run to the national title game, which McMillan played in, this was a season where he was banged up. So McMillan ends up going in the third round when Michael Penix and Odunze go in the top 10. Jalen Polk goes early in the second round, but McMillan's a guy who can really play. And this past offseason, he was also a dominant player at OTAs and in the preseason. So there's a whole Jalen McMillan hive out there of people that really love Jalen McMillan and think that he could be a big-time fantasy asset. Now, that being said, we'll see what happens. But I think based on the quality of the Tampa Bay offense, the way Baker Mayfield is playing, you have to push the chips in and make a bet on Jalen McMillan. Even if I'm wrong, I think this is the correct process. And I expect that McMillan is not going to deliver Chris Godwin numbers, but I think he's a weekly flex, a weekly wide receiver 3 with upside and the ability to absorb targets in this offense. He is my number one addition at the wide receiver spot, and he's the number one addition in the top 10. Jauan Jennings, available in 70% of leagues. Jennings goes from like a potential cut last week to a must-add this week. Brandon Aiyuk is done, torn ACL. So it's going to be Jauan Jennings and Ricky Pearsall competing. You also have Deebo Samuel now dealing with pneumonia. So that's a funny one. Not funny. It's terrible he's got pneumonia, but we don't really know the timeline for return. I would guess it's not. And Deebo's obviously a professional athlete. You would guess that he bounces back like super quick off of this, and it's not really a long-term thing. But I think they'll be cautious, and I would expect him to miss this week. So Jauan Jennings, if he's back this week, is a guy who goes right into our lineups. And he's one where we've seen him have a 3-touchdown game this season with Brock Purdy. It's not hard to go back to him like being the wide receiver 1 on a particular week this season and giving us like 20% target share or more in multiple weeks of the year. Jennings was out playing Brandon Aiyuk for a large portion of the season. So Jauan Jennings needs to be a priority target this season. Now, there's another wide receiver there, Ricky Pearsall, who also makes our top 10, and you should be aggressive to get him as well. You want to walk away with a wide receiver this week. I don't want to stress that enough. Ricky Pearsall, background on him, goes to the Senior Bowl, does very, very well. Goes to the Combine, does even better. Athletic freak, runs out of the gym, jumps out the gym. This is like the kind of guy that puts up big-time numbers on multiple things, not just the 40. He had big-time jumping numbers, like really athletic guy. Goes in the first round to the 49ers. The argument is he is the replacement for Aiyuk or Samuel. The thought being one of those guys could have gotten traded at the NFL draft or this offseason. Both of them stay. Then you have the Brandon Aiyuk situation where Brandon Aiyuk holds out. At the same time, Ricky Pearsall gets shot this offseason. Terrible. But he recovers. It was recovers very quickly from like a pretty serious gunshot wound. Pearsall is one where the story is crazy, but then he returns last week and gets a 75% snap share. So they already trust him enough to have him on the field 3/4 of the time. So Ricky Pearsall is one that we want to prioritize. First round pedigree, really an exciting player. Jennings as well. McMillan, that's our top 3 wide receivers this week, but there's more. There's a lot more wide receivers to talk about. Let's talk about the arbitrage plays in Tampa Bay and in San Francisco. Now, one of these players is super cheap, and another one you're still going to have to use a little bit of fab on, but it doesn't make my top 10. Trey Palmer. And some people are going to be more aggressive on Trey Palmer than I am. I think Trey Palmer is good. I just don't see him as a guy who's going to absorb targets consistently, as consistently as Jalen McMillan. Trey Palmer, 6th round pick in 2022 draft. It's funny, if I say Trey Palmer was an LSU wide receiver, you're like, okay, I'm ready to go, Theo. Let's push the chips in. But then if I say he was a Nebraska wide receiver, you're a little less enthusiastic. Transferred from LSU to Nebraska. Has a lot of speed, was a 6th round pick, 3 touchdown catches as a rookie. Now he's going to get an increased opportunity. He's sort of an arbitrage play. You're not going to be able to get him for like a $0 bid, but he's an arbitrage play to like the McMillan, the Jennings, the Ricky Pearsall, like the higher end guys this week with an opportunity to take an outsized role. Then the other arbitrage play would be Jacob Cowing, where he's like the contrarian play to the Pearsall Jennings edition. Jacob Cowing, 4th round pick out of Arizona, had 2 catches, 50 yards this past week. This was a guy who started out at UTEP and transfers to Arizona. Ricky Pearsall was also a transfer, Arizona State to Florida. So it's like they get these 2. It's just wild times. A lot of these college players now transfers, but still interesting to talk about. So Cowing caught a lot of balls. He's a smaller wide receiver, doesn't have the athletic measurables quite of a Ricky Pearsall, but he's a guy that we're also interested in. So deep format, if you want to slide in and like try to game this situation, Palmer, Cowing. If you want to pay for it and you want to go for the guys that have the clearest path, Jalen McMillan, Jauan Jennings, and Ricky Pearsall. Sticking at the wide receiver position, Jalen Tolbert still makes my top 10 this week. Tolbert was a guy that had 21.7 points in week 5. He had 4 catches, 53 yards in Dallas's beatdown loss to Detroit. But he's a guy where I think post-bye week, we can count on him to give us like high-end wide receiver 4, like maybe some flexes some weeks. Production. Year 3 player, was having a solid season. He's had multiple double-digit point weeks. Cedric Tillman makes the top 10 this week. 3rd round pick in 2023 out of Tennessee. Steps right into the Amari Cooper role last week. 12 targets, 8 catches, 81 receiving yards. He should slot in as the number 2 target to David Njoku week in, week out. I like Cedric Tillman. He makes the top 10. I don't think this was a fluke. I think he can play. Dontayvion Wicks. He's available in 73% of leagues now. Earned his way back into our good graces this week. 3 catches, 48 yards, and a touchdown. 6 targets. 6 targets from Jordan Love is good stuff. And I still think that the theory that Wicks, if Watson or Dubs misses time, would be really fun is there. Wicks had that 1 week where we all started him and he played very poorly. But the usage is still there. Guy has some drops, but they still throw the ball to him. He's still a very talented player. Troy Franklin, deeper ad, available in 99% of leagues. 5 catches for 50 yards on 6 targets. The rookie wide receiver was a teammate of Bo Nix's in college. So I think Troy Franklin is an interesting one. This is one where obviously 5 catches for 50 yards, nothing to write home about. But if those 6 targets start being consistent and maybe tick up and become like 8 targets, 7 targets, 9 targets on a consistent basis, that's something we're going to want on our rosters. And I think we're looking for people to establish themselves in Denver. They're winning games. Let's stick at the wide receiver position. Another player who makes our top 10 that was not going to be in the top 10 heading into Monday night. But again, I'm recording this later than I usually do. Rashod Bateman. Rashod Bateman's trending up. Snap share is approaching Zay Flowers every single week now. They're both on the field like the whole time. We saw Bateman go for over 100 yards and have a touchdown. We also saw him have a 71 receiving yard performance in week 6 against Washington. He's trending up. He's on the flex line. He's in our top 10 this week. Michael Wilson, depth piece, available in 82% of leagues. Xavier Legette, depth piece, available in 81% of leagues. Legette is a touchdown-dependent player. Disappointed in what we're seeing there. Mason Tipton and Bub Means in New Orleans, deep leaguers only. But if you want to take a stab at this New Orleans Saints wide receiver position, take a dart throw at Tipton. Seems like the Rashid Shaheed replacement. Bub Means, we saw the solid game a few weeks back. But again, this is probably the Chris Olave replacement. So a little bit more into Tipton. Tutu Atwell, available in 90% of leagues. He's had 19 targets, 12 catches over his past 2 games. Cooper Kupp was inactive. Jordan Whittington, though, shoulder thing. So we'll keep an eye on that one. Atwell has played well this year. So Atwell leads the Rams in receiving yardage this year. Deep leaguers only. Sticking at the wide receiver position, Jalen Nailor, deep leaguers. He had 5 targets, 4 catches, 76 yards. If anything happened to Jordan Addison or, God forbid, Justin Jefferson, Jalen Nailor would be interesting. He has a connection with Sam Darnold right now. So Jalen Nailor, interesting player. I think I covered all the wide receivers. If I missed anybody, let me know in the YouTube comments or send me a message on X if I forgot your wide receiver. But again, there's a lot of wide receivers to add this week. Jauan Jennings, Ricky Pearsall, Jalen McMillan, Rashod Bateman, Cedric Tillman, Jalen Tolbert all make our top 10. We'll reveal the top 10 in a few minutes. Tight end, less names to cover than running back and wide receiver. Zach Ertz is sort of like, Hunter Henry is going to be rostered in a lot of leagues. Zach Ertz is going to be way more readily available. Zach Ertz had a strong game. He had 4 catches, 40-plus yards, and a touchdown. The week before, he had 68 yards and 4 catches. So he's sort of like a high-end tight end 2, low-end tight end 1, attached to a really, really good offense right now. Jatavian Sanders, dynasty managers, make sure he's not available in your league. 99% available player in redraft. He's had 11 catches for 110 yards over his past 2 games. And sort of Xavier Legette not firing and Jatavian Sanders getting targets, I think that's noteworthy. Jatavian Sanders starting to get the targets there. Noah Fant, available in 70% of leagues. He's had 60 receiving yards in 3 out of his last 5 games. DK Metcalf's knee injury is not serious, but if it keeps him out this week, Fant could see a slight uptick. Jonnu Smith, available in 96% of leagues. Smith is the only working piece of the Dolphins' receiving game. He scored double-digit PPR points in back-to-back weeks. Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle have been invisible, but I think that it's going to get back to normal with Tua. Not like what we wanted, but not like you can't play Tyreek or Jalen Waddle if Tua comes back. And I think Jonnu Smith will take a step back. But if you're in a tight end premium format, add Jonnu Smith. Will Dissly, and again, he wasn't even in the article, but he played very well on Monday Night Football. He had 4 catches heading into the bye week, and we really didn't pay attention to that. But last night he had 11 targets, 8 catches, 81 receiving yards. Not sure if this is going to be a thing, but we have to pay attention to it because there is a lack of targets in LA. This is an interesting one. So keep an eye on Will Dissly. We'll say depth piece-wise, Ben Sinnott, if you want a lottery ticket. If Ertz were to go down, Sinnott would be an interesting one. This is a player who caught a touchdown finally, second round pick for Washington. Maybe they'll start using him. Now, these next 3 names, tight end premium managers only should consider. Tyler Conklin, 7 targets, 4 catches, only 10 receiving yards, but he had a touchdown. Colby Parkinson, can't talk about him anymore. He keeps letting me down. Post-bye week, the targets completely disappeared, and Kupp wasn't even back. Lucas Kroll, if you're in a tight end premium league, this past week he had 3 catches for 41 yards. That's it. That's really our tight end list. So check for Hunter Henry, though, if you need a tight end. He just missed being eligible for us, and he would have been the tight end 1 addition clearly. Okay, so here's our overall top 10 additions. And this one, again, completely updated because I'm usually recording this before Monday Night Football, but I had to re-record this one because of all the crazy injuries. We want to give you the most updated we can give you on podcasts, the most updated we can give you on YouTube videos at Player Profiler. We want to help you win and not give you outdated information. So here we are right here. The top 10. Jalen McMillan at 1. Drake Maye at 2. Ray Davis at 3 for me. And again, you could adjust Ray Davis with these next few wide receiver names, but he stood out as a running back addition to me. So again, Jalen McMillan at 1. Drake Maye at 2. Ray Davis at 3. Jauan Jennings at 4. Ricky Pearsall at 5. Rashod Bateman at 6, Tyler Goodson at 7, Jalen Tolbert at 8, Cedric Tillman at 9, and then at 10, you want to add your contingent upside running backs. Trey Benson, Kimani Vidal, Blake Corum, the rookie running backs. Again, Jalen McMillan, Drake Maye, Ray Davis, Jauan Jennings, Ricky Pearsall, Rashod Bateman, Tyler Goodson, Jalen Tolbert, Cedric Tillman, Trey Benson, Kimani Vidal, Blake Corum. I'm Theo Gremminger. Make sure you check out all of the podcasts and videos I'm dropping right here at Player Profiler. Press coverage this week. I have Dwayne McFarland coming a little later this week. I just recorded Dynasty Life with Ryan Heath of Fantasy Points. That was a really fun one. Some trade targets for you redraft managers as well in there, as well as Dynasty. And then I'm dropping sleeper, streamers, and stashes end of the week each week here. That's been a really fun one. If you enjoy my waiver wire content, I think you'll love that one as well. And then check out School of Scott. I'm recording that with Scott Barrett. Make sure you subscribe to that podcast. Scott Barrett of Fantasy Points. The two of us are recording that every single week. You've got to subscribe to that podcast. Not available on the Player Profiler Network. Go over to Fantasy Points or just type it into your favorite podcatcher, and you'll find School of Scott and subscribe to that. I'm there every single week. We got you covered. We want to keep grinding through. We want to get you as many wins as possible. If you need a replacement player at the wide receiver spot, keep grinding. Find them on the waiver wire this week. We're going to be back next week, and we're going to help you crush your leagues this season.
Hey, I want to thank you for being part of this broadcast. If you have any thoughts on it, leave a comment. If you enjoyed it, make sure you leave a like. And if you want to see more shows on the Player Profiler channel, subscribe to it. That's how we know you want more.